know why.
Hey, welcome back Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and secret canon connections in Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 1, The Next Generation. Right away, this debut episode beams in a double Easter egg with a font style and a specific text on screen with the phrase, in the 25th century. Now this font is reminiscent of the on-screen text at the beginning of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which began with in the 23rd century. But this aesthetic callback isn't just superficial either, because, as we'll see, this episode has other similarities to Wrath of Khan. As we get our first scene, we're hit with two musical Easter eggs back to back. We briefly hear a snippet of Jerry Goldsmith's overture from Star Trek First Contact. And then, as we see the SS Eleos surrounded by enemy ships, we get the 1941 song, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire from the Ink Spots. World on fire. Now this intro, complete with a nebula and a golden oldie, is very similar to the beginning of the season premiere of Picard, Season 1's Remembrance, which opened with a very similar shot set to the Bing Crosby version of Blue Skies. Blue Skies. But the Ink Spots have an even deeper connection to next-gen nostalgia. In 1991, Brent Spiner released an album of standards called Oh Yellow Eyes Is Back. On the track, It's a Sin to Tell a Lie, Spiner was joined by four backup singers called the Sunspots, who were Michael Dorn, Jonathan Frakes, Patrick Stewart, and LeVar Burton. So the Ink Spots singing at the start of Picard Episode 3 could be interpreted as foreshadowing the reunion of the TNG crew. Or maybe that Brent Spiner might sing later in the season. Or is that just wishful thinking? Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm down for that. Right? High five. So before we see Beverly Crusher, we're shown a slew of objects that should remind us of the Good Doctor, including her flowers from Cause and Effect, her pearls from The Big Goodbye, as well as two drama masks, reminding us of Bev's love of playwriting and the theater, which cropped up in the episodes The Nth Degree, Disaster, Frame of Mind, and A Fistful of Datas. In the latter episode, it was kind of implied that Bev's play, Something for Breakfast, was probably a play about her having breakfast with Captain Picard.
I need to talk to you about something for breakfast.
We also get a very deep cut here with an award that says Corps Carolee V Medical Away Team Honorary Citizens. So this references a mission of the Enterprise D from TNG, which we never actually saw. In the episode Allegiance, Picard mentions that the Enterprise's medical relief mission to Corps Carolee V had been classified, which, at the time, allowed him to realize that Cadet Martina Hero was an imposter.
Starfleet has classified the Corps Carolee 5 plague as secret.
Allegiance also featured a Jean-Luc imposter on the Enterprise D who made romantic moves on Beverly. Now, while we see all these Beverly artifacts, we also hear Captain Picard's voice reading his own log from The Best of Both Worlds Part 1. In this retro voiceover, Picard mentions,
The Enterprise remains concealed in the dust cloud.
The hide in the nebula trick comes from the Wrath of Khan, and at the start of this episode of Picard, Beverly is hiding her ship in a nebula. This isn't just a nebula Easter egg, guys, it's kind of like a Matryoshka doll of nebulae. Just before Beverly Crusher appears, we get a quick glimpse of a container that says Lieutenant Commander Jack Crusher, USS Stargazer, NCC 2893. This references Beverly's late husband, Jack Crusher, first mentioned in Encounter at Farpoint and glimpsed at as a hologram in Family.
You see, this Jack Crusher won't exist by the time you're all grown up.
The Stargazer was, of course, Captain Picard's first command, and Jack was his best friend, which complicated Jean-Luc's romantic feelings for Beverly way back when they were all younger. Other than Jack's hologram, played by Doug Wirt, the only glimpse we have of this era comes from the episode Violations, in which we get a twisted flashback in which Beverly has to identify Jack's body. This flashback is deeply disturbing, mostly because Picard still has hair, making him look like a time-traveling 2023 Daniel Craig. We also see a cup of blue liquid on the table here. Was Bev sipping some Romulan ale? Doesn't she know that it's illegal?
Romulan ale? Why, Bones, you know this is illegal.
Beverly revealed. As an alarm sounds, Beverly pops up and she's rocking a big collar jacket, which is very much in the style from the away team jackets from The Wrath of Khan and The Search for Spock, giving Bev a Savick, Admiral Kirk, Carol Marcus vibe. Bev grabs a phaser rifle, which is pretty much the same style we saw in First Contact and the other TNG films. Beverly's assailants have masks with creepy bird-like noses, slightly reminiscent of the various masks worn in the sci-fi series 12 Monkeys, including the mysterious Witness. Picard's showrunner, Terry Matalas, began his career as a production assistant on Voyager and Enterprise, but in between that time and now, he's probably best known as the showrunner of Sci-Fi's 12 Monkey series. And there are a lot more 12 Monkey connections coming in this season of Picard.
Don't you forget about me.
When Beverly sends the Myriad codec message, her screen has the phrase Starfleet Encryption 1701D version 2.4. So this foreshadows the fact that Bev is sending a message to Jean-Luc's old Enterprise D comm badge. Now, to unpack this entire Easter egg, we've got to jump ahead just a little bit later in the episode when Jean-Luc gets Bev's message at his chateau. When Picard's old communicator chirps, he unpacks some old stuff, including his burgundy-colored TNG uniform and its corresponding comm badge. His computer mentions that the comm badge belonged to Captain Jean-Luc Picard and mentions the exact time he took command of the Enterprise. Stardate 41153.7, which references the opening of Encounter at Farpoint.
Captain's log, stardate 41153.7.
So what's the deal with Starfleet Encryption 1701D version 2.4?
Well, Doug, oddly enough, it connects back to the best of both worlds. Later, when Riker and Picard are taking in 10 forward in Los Angeles, Riker references a moment when Picard was incapacitated when he was turned into Locutus of the Borg. Interestingly, though, both Picard and Riker allude to an adventure that we never saw, in which the crew believes that their comms were compromised on Rigel 6, or was it Rigel 7?
7.
Anyway, between the Rigel 6 or Rigel 7 incident, which we never saw, and the whole thing with the Borg, it would seem that the Enterprise D crew created a new encryption system for their communicators, hence 1701D version 2.4. And no, despite Riker and Picard acting super familiar with the Myriad codec, it was not even mentioned once, not even in TNG. However, Rigel 7 is a very famous Star Trek planet.
This is Rigel 7.
That's where Pike fought a huge warrior in the cage, and is, in fact, one of the first strange new worlds in all of Star Trek history. Speaking of strange new worlds, the titles for Picard Season 3 have been streamlined significantly. Instead of an elaborate intro, we get one title card accompanied by another musical reference to Jerry Goldsmith's First Contact score, as well as some of the flute from the 2 previous seasons of Picard. Now, the title of this episode, also called Part 1, is The Next Generation, and we all know what that references. However, this font style and the way the text is on screen by itself is reminiscent of the episode title card for Encounter at Farpoint, the first TNG episode ever. Picard and Laris are doing some spring cleaning at the Chateau Picard and planning a trip to Choctaw 4, a Romulan planet first mentioned in the Voyager episode time and again.
Choctaw 4?
A Romulan research colony was nearly destroyed during the testing of one of these devices.
Picard talks about giving his famous painting of the Enterprise D to Geordi, who he mentions is running the Fleet Museum.
I want to give it to Geordi.
Give it away.
So because we know Geordi will appear in this season, one has to wonder, will we also see the Fleet Museum? The closing credits of this episode feature a computer graphic that displays something called Fleet Museum Athan Prime, which seems to be the same thing Jean-Luc is talking about here. And by the way, Athan Prime is a 12 Monkeys reference. In 12 Monkeys, the character of Athan, a time traveler, was played by James Callis. In 12 Monkeys, Athan was also what was called a primary, meaning that he could basically see through time. In addition to talking about giving away his painting of the Enterprise to Geordi, Picard openly talks about his possessions. And we see many of those possessions, including the Resican flute from the Inner Light, a Promelian battlecruiser ship in a bottle from Booby Trap,
Model airships. I used to build them when I was a child. My God, I bet I had a Promelian battlecruiser too.
a golden Enterprise D model on Jean-Luc's desk, a massive Bajoran symbol, and the ancient Kurlan Nasox from the Chase.
I'm going to sip Saurian brandy and think about writing my memoir.
Jean-Luc talking about Saurian brandy references the oldest booze in Star Trek history.
Saurian brandy.
Interestingly, the only Saurian who is a regular character in all of Star Trek canon is Linus on Star Trek Discovery.
Bless you.
When Riker and Picard hang out at 10 Forward in Los Angeles, we learn that Starfleet is about to celebrate Frontier Day, which Riker says is a parade through space, all about going boldly for the last 250 years.
Wants to hear some old fart drone on about going boldly for the last 250 years.
By the way, the events of early pre-Federation Starfleet, the voyages of the NX-01, are about 250 years in the past from the events of Star Trek Picard Season 3.
It's been a long road.
Riker tells Picard that Deanna and Kestra will be fine without him. Now this references, of course, his wife Deanna Troi and their daughter Kestra, who we met in Picard Season 1 in the episode Nepenthe. Kestra is named after Troi's secret sister, who we learned about in the TNG episode Dark Page. And by the way, Troi's sister, played by Kirsten Dunst.
Yes.
We then catch up with Raffi on Metalis Prime, which of course is named for showrunner Terry Metalis, very cute. This planet has a Free Cloud vibe from Picard Season 1, but it is not the exact same place. As Raffi walks through the marketplace, we see somebody holding a Zhat Vash weapon, which we first saw in Picard Season 1. Now while Raffi needles in Orion for underworld information, we learn two things. She and Seven have broken up, again.
My girlfriend left me.
and this means that their reconciliation at the end of season 2 didn't last. Raffi also mentions that there's been
shit stolen from Daystrom off-site station,
which references the Daystrom Institute, which has been a part of Trek lore since the introduction of Richard Daystrom in the original series episode The Ultimate Computer. The Earthbound Daystrom Institute played a huge role in Picard season 1 and is the workplace where Dr. Jurati worked and kept B4's bod in a drawer. But Raffi saying off-site station is interesting and suggests a different, more secret Daystrom location, which we've not seen before. All this talk about secrets leads us to the revelation that Raffi has not been kicked out of Starfleet and is, in fact, working for Starfleet Intelligence as she uses a classic flip-top communicator to check in with her superiors. Okay, when Raffi busted out her retro communicator, the episode officially goes into nostalgia overdrive. I mean, Riker and Picard's trip to the Titan is filled with more Easter eggs than perhaps some of entire episodes of other new Star Trek shows. Interestingly, most of these are references that connect to the Kirk-era feature films. Here's everything crammed into those scenes. Riker's shuttle feels very travel-poddish, which should remind you of Scotty and Kirk in Star Trek the Motion Picture. The starbase itself is very much like Star Trek III's starbase, which was designed by Industrial Light and Magic in 1983 and has reappeared in several Star Trek films and episodes.
enjoy the ride, and welcome home.
Enterprise confirms.
Riker and Picard's cover story for sneaking on the Titan is that they are performing an inspection of the ship.
You and I are two highly ranked members of Starfleet, doing a routine surprise inspection.
Doing a legit inspection of the Enterprise is exactly why Kirk was on the ship in the Wrath of Khan.
I hate inspections.
The music here from Stephen Barton has a very James Horner feeling to it, which should remind you of Wrath of Khan. But when we see the Titan, we get touches of Jerry Goldsmith's The Enterprise theme from the motion picture. So the voice we hear here,
Admiral Picard, Captain Riker, welcome to the Titan,
is the voice of Picard showrunner Terry Matalas. Picard mentions that the Titan is Will's old command, and Will says that the ship is the new refit Neo Constitution class. Now, Neo Constitution class refers to the class of the original series version of the USS Enterprise, and the refit Constitution class is from the classic feature films. When Riker and Picard arrive on Titan, we see an honor guard complete with someone using a boatswain whistle. This looks like the exact boatswain whistle from the Undiscovered Country used when the Klingon delegation beams over to the Enterprise A. We quickly learn that the first officer of the Titan is 7 of 9, who tells Picard and Riker that now she goes by Commander Annika Hansen. This references her human name prior to her assimilation, which we first learn in her very first appearance in the Star Trek Voyager episode Scorpion Part 2. The scene where 7 takes Riker and Picard to the bridge of the Titan and then takes the Titan out of the space dock mirrors various moments from the Wrath of Khan, the Search for Spock, and Undiscovered Country. Saying Admiral on the bridge is from Wrath.
Admiral on the bridge.
While the space dock doors are exactly like the space dock doors in the Search for Spock. 7 calls for the Dockmaster, which is exactly what Kirk did before leaving space dock in Star Trek VI.
Uhura, get me the Dockmaster.
Control tower reading, sir.
Even 7 taking the ship out of space dock references Savick piloting the Enterprise out of the space dock in Star Trek II. Heading out under impulse power feels like a reference to Valeris. Now, Picard is also incorrect about the new protocol telling engineering before slamming into the maximum warp.
That's no longer protocol on the newer models of the fleet. It's all automated now.
Which seems to reference Kirk not knowing how the refit Enterprise worked in the motion picture.
Admiral, this is an almost totally new Enterprise. You don't know her a tenth as well as I do.
So what? I guess they just don't make them like they used to, huh? No! Nobody ever made them like this.
7 also mentions the metaphasic shield is at ready, which interestingly is a Dr. Crusher reference. In the TNG episode Suspicious, Crusher championed emerging shield tech from a Ferengi scientist named Dr. Rega, which nearly resulted in her getting kicked out of Starfleet and almost getting killed.
His invention was based on metaphasic fields, but his methodology was completely unorthodox.
And in another really cool Easter egg to this show, Dr. Rega, that Ferengi, is played by your mom. But now it looks like Rega's tech is part of standing operator procedure on Starfleet ships. In the middle of all this, there's a small family reunion. Picard learns the smiling ensign is Sidney LaForge, the helmsman of the Titan. Now, Sidney is the daughter of Geordi LaForge, who was, of course, the first helmsman of the Enterprise D before he became chief engineer in season 2.
Lieutenant, take us out of orbit.
Aye, sir.
And Mr. LaForge?
Sir.
Step on it.
The name Sidney LaForge actually comes from TNG 2. In the series finale, when Picard flashes forward to an alternate future, Geordi visits him at Chateau Picard and mentions that he has a daughter named Sidney. Funny enough, Picard can't remember Sidney's name in All Good Things.
Brett, Alandra, and,
Sidney.
This is similar to what happens here when he doesn't recognize her at all. Finally, having a younger LaForge piloting the ship is also reminiscent of Star Trek Generations, in which Kirk is shocked to meet Demora Sulu, Hikaru Sulu's daughter and the helmsman of the Enterprise B. Seven gets to say engage here, which we tend to associate with Picard, but Janeway said engage in Voyager and Sisko said engage in DS9. Also, the first person to say engage in all of Star Trek was Captain Pike in The Cage. Engage! But clearly at some point he changed his catchphrase to
Hit it. Hit it. Hit it.
Todd Stashwick is Captain Liam Shaw. Once again, this is a Sideways 12 Monkeys reference. Stashwick played Deacon in that series, and his signature style and unique wit are on full display here. Shaw complains about Riker's love of jazz, which we first learned about in the TNG episode 11001001. Shaw teases Picard and Riker about crash landing.
Engaging in fire, crash landing, expectedly or unexpectedly. You know, the usual for you boys.
Referencing the crash of the Enterprise D in Generations, and possibly the fact that Picard ran the Shinzon with the Enterprise E in Nemesis. Now during this conversation, as if Picard can't look any worse, he confuses Space Station Deep Space 4 with Deep Space 11.
DS4 has been shut down for a year.
I believe the Admiral means DS11.
Now in fairness, people in Star Trek get planets and space stations confused all the time.
In Ceti Alpha 5 there was life. A fair chance. This is Ceti Alpha 5!
Shaw's outright mistrust of Picard and Riker is also interesting and suggests the dangerous exploits of the Enterprise crew are not universally loved. When he says,
I love reading about all your wildly exciting and equally irresponsible adventures.
It feels realistic. Not everyone in Starfleet would think highly of these guys. Instead of giving them their own room, Shaw assigns Riker and Picard a couple of bunks, which gives these two a very Star Trek VI moment.
Bones, are you afraid of the future?
Shaw also rudely dismisses Picard and Seven's friendship because they are both former ex-Borg.
I am Locutus.
I speak for the Borg.
Later, when Seven confronts Riker and Picard about why they're really on the Titan, she mentions that Picard and Janeway convinced her to join Starfleet.
You and Janeway convinced me to join Starfleet.
In Picard Season 2, we learned that Starfleet had prevented Seven from joining Starfleet because she was a former Borg.
Starfleet shut me down because you were Borg?
But at the end of that season, Picard put Seven in temporary command of the Stargazer, which must have pushed Starfleet to change their rules. Seven also mentions having been a Ranger, and this is a reference to the Fenris Rangers, the ad hoc group that Seven worked for in both Seasons 1 and 2 of Picard. At the start of Season 2, she was using Rios' ship, the La Serena, to run her own humanitarian missions. In an interesting parallel, Rios going back to Starfleet was why Seven got the La Serena.
You owe me a ship, Picard.
But now that Seven is in Starfleet, the La Serena, the Millennium Falcon of the 25th century, is now being flown by Raffi. What? Yahoo! And when we rejoin Raffi on her undercover mission, she's at the La Serena watching a video of her granddaughter, who is not yet born in Season 1. Raffi's trying to figure out what the clue about the Red Lady might mean, and if it signals some kind of big attack. She looks up a bunch of upcoming events in the galaxy, and we see Gratitude Festival, which is the Bajoran holiday that we first learned about in the DS9 episode Fascination.
Ah, Peldor Joy, Odo.
Peldor Joy to you too, Major.
Empire Union Day, which likely refers to the Klingon Empire, but it could be another empire. Frontier Day, which we already knew was happening. And then Raffi finds out there's a new statue of Rachel Garrett getting unveiled. Now, Rachel Garrett was the captain of the Enterprise C, who we previously met in yesterday's Enterprise, and she sacrificed her life to defend Klingons against a Romulan sneak attack.
Rachel Garrett. How's my ship?
However, there are a couple more huge Easter eggs hidden on Raffi's screen here. We see the new Sagan-class Stargazer from Season 2, but also a ship which is called the Voyager B, as well as the Enterprise F, which if you read closely says slated for early decommissioning. The Enterprise F is the ship that followed the Enterprise E and is an Odyssey-class ship. Its design comes from the Star Trek Online game, which also contributed several ships from that game to the fleet scene in Picard Season 2. But why is the Enterprise F scheduled for early decommissioning? Will we get to see an Enterprise G this season? Will we have to wait all season to see it?
I would like to see the baby.
When Riker and Picard board the SS Eleos, they quickly find Beverly in a life support pod. Now this pod is a lot like the ones the Enterprise discovered in the neutral zone, complete with the fog and everything. But Picard and Riker aren't alone. The mysterious voice from the beginning of the episode is back, and now he's got a face. Ed Spaliers! This guy pulls a phaser on Riker, and that looks very much like the style of the Starfleet phaser from the Undiscovered Country. Riker eventually gets it away from him, only to ask who this guy is relative to Beverly, and he simply says,
The son.
So this fight and the revelation of the character's mom is a wonderful tribute to the Wrath of Khan. There, Kirk fights David Marcus, not knowing who he is, and then asks,
Where's Dr. Marcus?
only to be met with,
I'm Dr. Marcus.
So does that mean that this guy's Jean-Luc's? What is he?
Yeah, right. Now, there's a somewhat hilarious Easter egg hidden at the very end of the end credits, and it's Picard's password for, well, pretty much everything. The code Picard 47 Alpha Tango is something that Picard used to unlock a private message in First Contact.
Authorization Picard 47 Alpha Tango.
But it was also his password to set the auto-destruct on the Enterprise in that same movie.
Begin auto-destruct sequence. Authorization Picard 47 Alpha Tango.
That's the stupidest combination I ever heard in my life. That's the kind of thing an idiot would have on his luggage.
Well, guys, that's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.